Sometimes we forget to discuss the import tariffs definition, which is taxes placed on goods that are brought to the US by importers, American importers, who then have to pass that high cost to everyday consumers, meaning you and me. New Mexico is a key player in this conversation because the non-negotiable reality is that New Mexico, similar to the United States as a whole, depends on trade with Mexico. New Mexico, a border state founded in 1912, is a majority-minority state where both English and Spanish are constitutionally equally recognized as our official languages. There are not enough words in English or Spanish that can adequately describe how damaging and destructive President Trump's threat to impose tariffs on Mexican imports are and will be. Mexico is our state's largest trade partner, sourcing a quarter of all imports amounting to more than $2.5 billion per year. Our state's core industries include oil and gas, agriculture, healthcare, housing, energy, aerospace, defense, film, construction, and technology. New Mexico largely relies on imports from Mexico to sustain these industries and keep our economy strong. New Mexico maintains the second largest sovereign wealth fund in the country at more than $59 billion, much of which comes from the fact that we are the second largest crude oil producing state in the country. Our oil and gas industry makes up approximately 35% of the state's budget and assists with the growth of investment in education, infrastructure, and public safety. New Mexico oil and gas sector relies on machinery and equipment imported from Mexico. With higher costs on these imports, drilling, production, and industry development will slow and lead to higher gas prices. Mexico is also the United States' largest agricultural trade partner. 60% of New Mexicans live in rural communities, many of which produce pecans, corn, beans, famous Hatch green chili, Dixon apples, pumpkins, dairy, wine, alfalfa, onions, papas, wheat, cotton, and piñon. New Mexico ports process nearly a third of cattle imported from Mexico every year. Our agricultural industry will face blows as tariffs on cattle and produce will result in slowed food production and increased food insecurity. For those who are not from the ranch, that means increased prices on meat too. In a state where more than 15% of residents face food insecurity, the tariffs on Mexico will worsen food accessibility and cause even more New Mexicans to go hungry or make sacrifices between paying for food or medicine. Given that our largest import from Mexico is medical equipment, we can see healthcare become more expensive and inaccessible than ever before. In perspective, almost 80% of all of our babies are born in New Mexico per year placed on Medicaid. The cost of construction and housing will also rise to unprecedented new highs as critical building materials like steel become more expensive. Guess what? Steel is also imported from Mexico. Our national labs, Sandia and Los Alamos, and our 4 military bases will face higher cost burdens as well, since they utilize uranium and equipment and machinery imported from Mexico. It's evident that our economy relies heavily on trade with Mexico. Trump's tariff threats will suffocate our economy and disrupt our way of life. Trump is playing games with people's lives, and it's a huge punch in the gut to all of those who have consistently carried this nation on their back. As the first elected Latina state treasurer in this country's history, I want New Mexicans and the Latino community across this state and our nation to know that I know what contribution and sacrifices you and your families have made to make this country strong, brilliant, and vibrant. I know that in New Mexico's Latino GDP alone, it's $36 billion per year. I know that nationally, undocumented immigrants bring in over $100 billion in taxes per year, and in 2022 alone, your spending power was more than $254 billion. I also know that in 2022, the US Latino GDP jumped to a record $3.7 trillion. Despite COVID, Latino economic output was greater than 6 of the world's 10 largest economies with the GDP growth rate outpacing China and India. Let me be clear. Similar to what we learned during COVID, when some of us are not healthy, none of us are healthy. Everyone will carry the burden of the Trump tariff war. And if President Trump and his administration insist on running this nation like a business, they should know better that best practices include research, respect, trust, inclusivity, compromise, and reasonability. Trump is employing the same intimidating, bullying tactics that likely drove 6 of his own businesses to bankruptcy. Trump can fail at his own businesses, but the consequences of failing the American people and our relationship with our southern neighbor are far too dire. The consequence of shattering our economic stability is chaos that will prove detrimental to spending, market rate volatility, and overcompensated inflation with long-lasting effects. These tariffs are not just about the import and export of products or about supply and demand or inflation. These tariff wars are about people, and the president brought this war to our home front. The Trump tariff war disregards hardworking Americans and immigrants who create small businesses or who tirelessly work back-breaking jobs day in and day out for minimal pay and sometimes unhealthy work conditions to make this country great, to sustain our way of life, to build our houses, to teach our children, to care for our elderly, to put food on our tables, and to keep this country moving forward. The Trump tariff war on Mexico is a reckless gamble with people's lives, their well-being, and their futures. And I and my administration, along with every other elected official in power that wants to advance the conversation of prioritizing our economic well-being and stability, will continue to push this conversation and this country forward.